Today we're going to go over ethical challenges in global engineering projects. I know we spent some time yesterday talking, or last Thursday talking about it. Today we're going to go into more detail. Engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, perform services only in areas of their competence, issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner, act for each employer or client as faithful agents or trustees, avoid deceptive acts, conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. All right, so these are the main objectives for today. We want to delve deeper into ethical challenges. So imagine a scenario where the drive for economic progress and job creation leads to rapid expansion of an industrial complex in developing nations. Consider the ethical challenges that arise when the urgency to provide employment and meet international demand potentially conflict with ensuring safe work conditions. We're going to need to discuss the complex ethical decisions involved in balancing global standards with local customs and moral imperative of development. I want you to think about the potential consequences of prioritizing speed and economic gain over thorough safety measures and ethical practices. I want you to think and decide about or have an opinion on the impact of industrial decisions on local communities, workers' lives, and the integrity of the engineering profession. I want you to recognize the risks associated with not adequately addressing these ethical challenges, including the loss of life and long-term social and economic repercussions. We're going to explore strategies that could be employed to address and prevent ethical dilemmas in global engineering projects, such as comprehensive risk assessment and community engagement. I'm hoping this highlights the importance of a proactive approach to anticipate and address ethical issues, ensuring that safety and ethical considerations are integrated into project planning from the outset. You got to remember, it's a lot easier to address safety issues by making sure they don't exist than it is to do it after the fact. While I'm doing all of this, I encourage you to adopt or try to adopt the best practices that balance the demand of global business with the well-being of workers and sustainability of local communities. So I want you to consider the perspective of the owner of Rana Plaza. It was a complex in Bangladesh that became a symbol of the nation's drive for progress and economic growth. The owner saw this building as more than just a structure. It was envisioned as a testament to the overcoming historical and geographical challenges through determination and ingenuity. So Bangladesh is not famous for being wealthy. And so having an actual industrial complex and having success was a big deal. So in the context of Bangladesh, as in many places around the world, the approach to engineering is deeply intertwined with the socioeconomic fabric of the country. The owner of Rana Plaza had ambitious plans to erect a factory on top of an existing shopping center, a move that promised to generate a multitude of jobs for the local populace. However, when the architect opposed this plan, the reasons given were shrouded in ambiguity and lacked clear technical justification. This opposition from the architect was perceived by the owner not merely as a professional counterpoint, but as a direct challenge to the very spirit of innovation, progress that the nation prided itself on. To the owner, it seemed as though there were ulterior motives at play, veiling the true intentions behind a facade of concern. It was as if the architect was not just questioning the feasibility of the project, but also undermining a vision that had the potential to elevate the economic standing of the entire community. The regulatory framework in Bangladesh may differ from those in the West, reflecting local needs, politics, and culture. They are tailored to the country's reality. Being told that this plan was not feasible was not only frustrating for the owner, but also seen as culturally disrespectful, challenging the very vision that could potentially transform the community's economic landscape. The race to keep up with technological advancements is another layer of this complex scenario. While Bangladesh's adoption rates of new technology may lag behind developed nations, strides are being made. The factory on top of Rana Plaza was meant to be a beacon of progress, embodying the cultural values that prioritized growth and development. These values influence the approach to safety, design, and functionality, which may diverge from international standards but are deeply rooted in the local context. The owner was determined to find a balance between these cultural imperatives and practical advice of experts, striving for a solution that respected both the cultural perspectives and the ambitious goals of the project. The vision for Rana Plaza was to demonstrate to the world that Bangladesh could also create marvels that serve the need of people. The owner's resolve was to work through the challenges and ensure that Rana Plaza would stand tall, not just as a physical structure, but as a monument to the resilience and entrepreneurship of the nation. So, as we move forward from understanding the owner's vision for Rana Plaza, let's delve into the inherent complexities that such ambitious projects often encounter. So, the project was, in and of itself, complex. The ambition to adhere to multiple engineering and safety standards can introduce significant complexity, particularly in multinational projects like Rana Plaza. So the challenge lies in harmonizing these standards with local practices and expectations, a task that requires both sensitivity and expertise. Um, so you have to remember, you have to design for what resources you're going to be able to use when you build. So if you have a German engineer and a German architect design something, they have to remember that a lot of the construction is going to be done by the locals. And so you can't just assume that they're going to have the same construction equipment in Bangladesh that you would have in Germany. You have to plan around the construction equipment they're going to have in Bangladesh. There's a stark reality that this that discrepancies in safety standards can lead to serious risks. So you have to remember the construction equipment are going to be different. So the safety concerns are also going to be different. Um, and um, this is not just for the workers and users, but also the surrounding environment. So if you are building something in Rhode Island, you need to plan around Rhode Island getting hit by hurricanes. It does happen. It happens about once or twice a year. Um, but you don't really need to design around earthquakes. However, if you were to design something in California, you would have to plan on that building being hit by an earthquake. And so you have to have the same thought processes when you're building something in, say, Bangladesh. What's going to happen there? What's unique to that area that you have to actually plan around? In the case of Rana Plaza, the divergence between local and international safety practices raised the question about the potential hazards. You have to remember there's an economic impact. So differing standards across borders can have profound effects on the cost, timeline, and ultimately the profitability of the engineering project. So for the owner of Rana Plaza, the economic implications of adhering to a variety of standards were a significant consideration as they impacted the feasibility and sustainability of the project. So imagine you are the project manager here. And we're talking about something that's going on in Bangladesh. It's quite feasible that you might end up designing something that needs to be built in Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Nigeria. Are you really going to want to be super motivated to follow standards that are meant to be followed in the US? if you know the people building it, the people using it aren't going to use it the same way as Americans. You're going to want to design it for all intents and purposes for the people who are going to be using it. And you want to design around what their behaviors, what their risk levels that they're willing to assume are, and things like that. Um, and then the last is there is a reputation and trust factor here. Um, the failure to respect and adhere to local standards can severely damage an organization's reputation. In the global market, trustworthiness is paramount. The perception that Rana Plaza's owner was potentially bypassing these standards could threaten not just the project's success, but also the long-term reputation of the enterprise. In summary, while the vision for Rana Plaza was rooted in progress and development, the execution of such a project was mired in complexities and varying standards, safety concerns, economic factors, and reputational risks. These are the multifaceted challenges that global engineering projects must navigate, balancing ambition with ethical and practical realities. So, back to the example of Rana Plaza. Uh, Rana Plaza was constructed in 2006. It's important to recognize the multifunctional nature of this commercial building. So this was situated in Dhaka, the Dhaka district of Bangladesh. Rana Plaza was not just another structure on the skyline, it was a hub of economic activity. The building's usage extended beyond a mere workplace. It was a microcosm of the local economy, housing several garment factories, a bank, and various retail shops, all under one roof. So you might want to think of this as something like a strip mall that had a factory on it. The significance of Rana Plaza can be seen in its role within the garment industry, which is a cornerstone of Bangladesh's economy. The factory within Rana Plaza were emblematic of the country's industrial growth, providing essential employment for thousands in the area, where job opportunities are both vital and valued. This wasn't just about employment, it was about the empowerment of a workforce in a densely populated region striving for economic stability and growth. However, the story of Rana Plaza is also a cautionary tale. It reminds us that the drive for economic prosperity must be balanced with responsibilities of ensuring safe working conditions and ethical practices. As we reflect on the significance of Rana Plaza, let us also consider the human element, the lives of the workers who spent their days within the walls contributing to an industry that is a lifeline for many, yet, as we would tragically learn, not without considerable risk. All right, so let's talk about the structural aspect of Rana Plaza. We encounter a series of critical missteps that culminate in tragedy. The building was originally designed to accommodate shops and offices, space that typically bears less weight than industrial operation. However, this design was not adhered to. The building was repurposed for heavy industrial use without the necessary structural reinforcement, a decision that would have dire consequences. The issue was compounded by illegal construction practices. Rana Plaza's additional floors were added without the proper permits, and the material used were substandard, not suitable for the demands of a building of its size and purpose. This disregard for legal and safety standards speaks to a broader issue of accountability and oversight in construction practices. Perhaps most distressingly, there were clear and ignored warnings of the impending disaster. Visible cracks in the building structure were reported, but these signs of distress were overlooked. Workers, many of whom relied on the wages of their jobs to support their families, were forced to return to work in an unsafe environment. This decision, driven by economic pressures, ultimately led to the collapse on April 24, 2013, a date that now marks one of the most devastating industrial accidents in recent history. These points underscore the importance of ethical engineering and construction practices. They serve as a stark reminder that the economic incentives override safety considerations. Consequences can be catastrophic. As future engineers and leaders, it's crucial to internalize the lesson of Rana Plaza, ensuring that the sanctity of human life is never secondary to the commercial interests. So I want you to reflect on this. 1,100 people died. And when that many people get hurt, it's really easy to look at this as just another statistic. But you shouldn't, right? This represents lives lost, families and communities. Um, and that means over 1,000 families are now in mourning. That they now have to deal with this tragedy. Um, and it was because the owner of the plaza didn't want to follow the architect's directions. Architect was very clear. Um, the building was already supporting too much weight. Adding more floors for what was clearly going to be an industrial area was going to put it way past design constraints. Um, the majority of the victims were garment workers, and notably, most of them were women. These were individuals with hopes, dreams, and responsibilities to their families. The collapse did not just end lives, it left a lasting scar in communities, with many families losing their primary earner and struggling to cope with the aftermath. The Rana Plaza disaster had a profound global impact, resonating across continents. It sparked international outrage and brought to light the often unseen human cost of global fashion industry. This tragedy became a catalyst for demanding reform in global supply chains, particularly in the garment industry, and highlighted the urgent need for improved safety standards. This event forced consumers and companies alike to confront the realities of cost-cutting measures and their potential consequences. It led to a push for greater transparency and accountability in supply chains, and initiatives like the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh were established in response. In discussing the aftermath of Rana Plaza, it's crucial to recognize the interconnectedness of our global economy and the ethical responsibilities that come with it. As future engineers and professionals, understanding the global impact of our work is essential. We must strive to ensure that such a tragedy never occurs again, advocating for implementing practices that safeguard the well-being of workers worldwide. All right, so we're going to talk about something less serious, um, but still important. Qualcomm. So Qualcomm Incorporated is an American multinational corporation headquartered in San Diego. The company is a key player in wireless technology and semiconductor industry, known for its development of CDMA and LTE technology. Qualcomm's technology are foundational to modern mobile communications, likely powering the smartphone and devices you're using right now. Many students may be familiar with the same Snapdragon, Qualcomm's brand for a family of mobile systems on a chip, sometimes referred to as SoC. Uh, Qualcomm is at the forefront of 5G technology, which is the next generation of wireless networks, offering faster speed and more reliable connection. Qualcomm has a very large patent portfolio. The company holds a significant number of patents critical for mobile devices, making its IP portfolio one of the most valuable in the world. Qualcomm's influence extends beyond consumer electronics. Its innovations are also integral to the development of connected devices in the Internet of Things, automotive industry, and beyond. Um, However, there are a lot of challenges with IP. Qualcomm's enforcement of patent rights varied by country due to differing IP laws and standards. The company faced challenges in countries where IP enforcement is less stringent or where the legal framework is less developed. Qualcomm engaged in multiple legal battles across different jurisdictions, highlighting the complexity of enforcing IP rights internationally. The company's disputes with manufacturers over licensing terms underscores the difficulty in maintaining control over IP. Qualcomm's aggressive defense of its IP sometimes clash with local business practices and perception of IP rights. In some markets, there was a cultural norm of sharing technology which conflicted with Qualcomm's licensing model. Qualcomm's technology is integral to the global supply chain for mobile devices, exposing its IP to various risks. The rapid pace of technological innovation sometimes outstripped the company's ability to protect its IP, as new products could circumvent existing patents. Qualcomm's approach emphasizes the importance of understanding and complying with the IP laws of each country in which it operates. The company used detailed licensing agreements to clearly define the terms of use for its IP, which is crucial for enforcement. Qualcomm registers its patent in multiple jurisdictions to ensure it has legal standing to enforce its rights. The company invests in continuous IP management and innovation to stay ahead of the technology curve. Qualcomm collaborates with local legal experts to navigate the complexities of each market's legal system and to ensure the compliance of local IP regulations. All right. Now we're going to talk about Shell. Royal Dutch Shell embarked on an ambitious project to explore oil reserves in the Arctic, an area with a delicate ecosystem and harsh operating conditions. It faced stringent U.S. and international environmental regulations. Shell had to innovate to meet higher standards for drilling and spill prevention. So they developed specialized equipment and protocols to minimize the environmental footprint, such as advanced icebreakers and drilling rigs designed for cold environments. Shell's operations were subject to scrutiny under international agreements like the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and various Arctic Council guidelines. The company's compliance efforts were complicated by the variability in how different countries implemented and enforced international environmental agreements. Engineers at Shell were tasked with the ethical responsibility to use resources sustainably. Oh my goodness. Engineers at Shell were tasked with the ethical responsibility to use resources sustainably, ensuring that oil exploration did not lead to undue pollution or waste. The project necessitated a commitment to protect the indigenous communities whose livelihoods were intertwined with the Arctic environment. Shell had to consider the potential global environmental impacts of its operations, including the contribution to climate change and precedent set for Arctic development. The ethical debate, along with the operational challenges and public protests, led Shell to eventually cease its Arctic drilling operations, reflecting the complex interplay between engineering, environmental stewardship, and corporate ethics. So now we're going to talk about labor practices. As we transition into a critical discussion on ethical landscapes of global engineering projects, we must address the core issue of fair wage, work conditions, and exploitation concerns. These are not just bullet points on the slide. They are fundamental human rights that are often challenged in pursuit of economic efficiency. Fair wages. So this is the concept of paying somebody, you know, what they're worth. Um, It's about ensuring that employees are compensated adequately for their labor, which is a reflection of respect and the value of their contribution. As future leaders, it's imperative to advocate for and implement wage structures that support a decent standard of living for all workers. You want to make sure that your work conditions are safe and humane. The thing is, this is really a non-negotiable aspect of ethical engineering practices. If you are aware that the work conditions aren't safe, you're not doing your job right. So this encompasses not only the physical safety measures, but also the mental well-being of employees. We must commit to creating environments that prioritize the health and safety of workers, recognizing that they are the backbone of an industry. The next is exploitation. Exploitation in the workplace can take many forms, from excessive work hours to the use of children in labor. It is an issue that plagues many sectors across the globe. Addressing these concerns requires vigilance, transparency, and zero-tolerance approach to any form of exploitation. Navigating these challenges ethically is not just about compliance with laws and regulations, it's about fostering a culture of integrity and responsibility. It involves making tough decisions that may not always align with the pursuit of profit, but are in line with the moral principles and the. As we delve deeper into these topics, let us consider the role of engineers professionals in shaping an industry that upholds these standards. It's about being at the forefront of change and being the voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. Our actions and decisions have the power to influence and transform the industry, setting a precedent for ethical practices. In our globalized economy, the disparity in wage standards across borders are stark. As we navigate these waters, it's crucial to understand the implication of these disparities on the workforce and the ethical responsibilities of engineers and companies. Global disparities, so the concept of a fair wage is not universal, it's relative. What one country deems as fair compensation for a day's work may be considered inadequate or even exploitive by another country's standards. This variance poses a significant challenge for multinational companies and engineers working across different jurisdictions. Living wages, so like the goal should always be to provide a living wage. This may not mere this this is not merely the minimum wage, but rather a wage that allows workers to afford a basic but decent standard of living. This includes the ability to pay for housing, food, healthcare, education, and some discretionary income. As engineers, we must advocate for and design systems that support the provision of a living wage. While adherence to local labor laws is a legal requirement, ethical practice often calls for a higher standard than that. It's not just enough to do the bare minimum required by law, especially when those laws may not protect the most vulnerable workers. Ethical considerations may compel us to exceed local standards, ensuring that our practices are not just legal but also just. In summary, as we consider the role of wage standards in global engineering projects, we must recognize the complexity of the issue. It's about the balancing of legal compliance and ethical imperative, and often about leading the way in setting higher standards for fair compensation. Let's consider how we, as future engineers, can contribute to a more equitable and just global workforce. So let me repeat this. You might be following the law by paying the bare minimum, but there's a very good chance that paying the bare minimum is unethical. And so you need to make sure that what you're paying is an ethical pay for the work that you're asking them to do. So one of the examples we're going to go over today is a case that became a pivotal moment in corporate social responsibility. Nike's labor exploitation issues in Southeast Asia. This case study not only highlights the ethical dilemmas faced by multinational corporations, but also serves as a learning point for how companies can and should take responsibility for their supply chains. So, Nike is and was a global leader in sportswear. They outsourced its manufacturing to a subcontractor in Southeast Asia. This business model is not uncommon and allows companies to benefit from lower labor costs. However, it also introduces the risk of distancing the brand from the manufacturing process. Problem here is that investigations revealed that the subcontracted factories had numerous issues, including poor working conditions, wages below living standards, and the employment of underage workers. These findings brought to light the harsh reality of labor exploitation in global supply chains. Now, Nike denied any responsibility initially, more or less saying, we didn't know, so we shouldn't be responsible. This stance was based on a traditional business separation between brand and supplier. However, in the court of public opinion and ethics, they lost. It didn't matter that they argued that because they didn't know, they weren't responsible. So this ethical dilemma caused Nike basically to lose a significant amount of money. Nike was confronted with a significant ethical dilemma. What is the extent of a company's responsibility for its indirect employees? This question forced Nike to reconsider its role in the supply chain and impact on its workers' lives. In summary, the Nike case teaches us about the complexities of supply chain management and the importance of ethical oversight. It underscores the need for transparency and accountability, not just for direct operations, but throughout the entire supply chain. As future engineers and business leaders, we must learn from such cases to build more ethical and responsible practices in our field. So in response to the exploitation of the children, Nike faced a wave of public outcry that ultimately catalyzed significant change within the company and its approach to corporate social responsibility. So Nike probably got more media exposure than they really wanted. The labor conditions in Nike's supply chain were thrust into the limelight by investigative journalism and media reports. This exposure led to widespread public awareness, which in turn sparked protest and calls for boycotts against the company. The reputation, so the image of Nike itself has been negatively tainted permanently because of this. If you watch SNL, one of the jokes they like to make about Nike is child labor. The negative media attention and public backlash pose a severe risk to Nike's brand. The company faced not just a moral reckoning, but a tangible financial loss as consumers began to question their purchasing choices. Now, the outcome was good. There was improvement and transparency in the face of these challenges. Nike took several steps to address the issues and rebuild its reputation. Nike developed and implemented a comprehensive code of conduct for all suppliers, setting clear expectations for labor practices and working conditions. The company began conducting rigorous third-party audits of its factories to ensure compliance with its new standards, and importantly, it made these audit results public. Nike increased its transparency efforts by disclosing the location and working conditions of its factories, a move that was not standard practice at the time for many corporations. Beyond compliance, Nike also invested in the well-being of its workers by initiating training and education programs aiming to empower the workforce and improve their quality of life. These actions taken by Nike illustrate the power of public pressure in driving corporate challenge. They also highlight the importance of proactive measures and safeguarding a company's ethical standards and its long-term success. As we reflect on the case, let's consider how transparency and accountability can serve as a cornerstone for ethical business practices and future endeavors. So I know I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. If you are caught being unethical, so if your company is caught, it can and will affect you financially. So there is an actual financial incentive to be ethical. And in today's reality, with social media, phones, with cameras getting smaller and smaller and smaller, smart technology becoming more prevalent, everything you do will eventually be public. So if you are doing something unethical, it's just a matter of time until people figure it out. Further, in addition to all of the vetting or all of the updates Nike made, they also started doing supplier vetting. Um, so this was the due diligence of making sure that suppliers actually followed ethical codes. Um, they did regular audits um, where they would actually go visit the factory to make sure that the factories that promised to follow the particular codes actually did that. Regular audits signal a commitment to continuous ethical compliance, can serve as a deterrent against potential lapse in supplier standards. They defined a clear code of conduct. So when they would go to the audits, they would actually say, is what you're doing complying with our code of conduct? And if it wasn't, they would actually force them to fix it. Transparency, though it's usually considered ethical, in this case, it was very clearly a strategic decision. Um, in the sense that they could show the public, hey, look, we stopped using child labor. You can start buying from us again. Um, and they started using local labor organizations and non-government organizations to help make sure that the companies wouldn't just clean up their act before an audit occurred. When we discuss the ethical implications of labor practices in engineering projects, the conversation must begin with safety. It is the cornerstone upon which all the other labor practices are built. You have to have the safety first mentality. The primary obligation of an engineering project is to ensure the safety of its workers. This goes beyond compliance with legal standards. It's about fostering a culture where safety is ingrained in every aspect of the workplace. Proper training, equipment, and safety protocols are not just regulatory requirements, they are moral imperatives. Worker safety is not limited to preventing accidents. It also encompasses the overall health and well-being of the workforce. This includes reasonable work hours, efficient breaks, access to health care, attention to mental health. A truly safe work environment is one that considers the holistic well-being of its employees. A safe workplace is also a communicative one. Workers must have the ability to report unsafe conditions, voice their concerns, provide feedback without fear of retribution. Establishing clear, accessible, and anonymous channels for feedback is crucial. These mechanisms empower workers and help create a responsive and responsible work environment. In summary, safety, health, and open communication are not just ethical requirements, they are the foundation of a sustainable and productive workforce. By prioritizing these aspects, companies can ensure that their projects are not only successful, but also morally sound and worker-centric. All right. So the next we're going to talk about is Apple supply chain. Apple does a really good job of advertising themselves as being altruistic, always doing the right thing for the right reasons, for the right people, for the right price. Apple, a leader in technology and innovation, faced a critical examination of its ethical practices when reports surfaced about workers' conditions in its supplier factory. The spotlight fell on Foxconn, one of Apple's largest suppliers, where conditions raised serious ethical concerns. One of the most pressing issues was the excessive work hours faced by employees. Reports indicated that workers were often required to work far beyond the standard work week, with little consideration for their health or personal time. Compensation is another area of concern. Despite the demanding work and long hours, the pay received by the workers were not commensurate with their labor. This raises questions about the valuation of labor and the responsibility of corporations to ensure fair compensation. The working environment in these factories was not just about discomfort, it was about danger. Unsafe conditions led to accidents and, tragically, to incidents of worker suicides. These extreme outcomes are a stark reminder of the human cost of failing to prioritize workers' welfare. These issues bring us to the core of the ethical debate. What is the responsibility of a corporation like Apple in ensuring the welfare of its workers in the supply chain? How far does their ethical obligation extend, and what measures should they take to safeguard the rights and well-beings of those who contribute to the success? In conclusion, the situation with Apple's supplier factories is a call to action for all global companies to scrutinize their supply chain. There's an opportunity to reaffirm the commitment to ethical labor practices and to take tangible steps to improve the lives of their workers worldwide. Now, before I go much further, is this honestly much different than what Nike was doing? Or is it totally different? I think, generally speaking, everyone agreed that, number one, Nike was doing something wrong by hiring children and having children work long hours, unsafe conditions. And second, Nike's response should have been a standard practice for doing business in another country. You audit the factory regularly to make sure nothing bad's happened. Because even if they're just a supplier, they do become part of your brand if they do something wrong. Now, looking at these nets, I want you, if you don't know already, they're suicide nets. People who worked at the factory would, at the end of their shift, go to the top of the building and jump. And Foxconn's solution to this wasn't to make workers' conditions better, it was to put up these suicide nets. When asked, when the employees were asked what work conditions were like, they described being in prison because they were not allowed to leave the complex for months. And that's what caused them to jump. And so if Nike should be responsible for what their supplier is doing, should Apple also be responsible for what their supplier is doing? Apple's response to the factory, or, Apple's initial stance in response to the revelation about poor working conditions in its supplier factory, particularly Foxconn, was one of purported unawareness. They played the same card Nike did. We don't know, so it's not our fault. This claim of ignorance came under intense scrutiny for several reasons. Apple is renowned for its meticulous attention to detail in product design and customer experience. This reputation extends to an expectation of thorough oversight in all aspects of business operation, including their supply chain. So they say that they're very meticulous, and I'll give it to them that they usually are. So if they're going to put this level of effort into things like what door hinge to use, because this is a delay that they had in their headquarters, it got delayed for years because they couldn't agree on doorknobs and door hinges, how could they have not known about these factories and that they were in such poor conditions? Given Apple's image and the level of control it exercises over product development, the public was very skeptical about the company's claim of being unaware. This skepticism was fueled by the contrast between the company's high standards for product quality and the reported neglect of workers' welfare. The situation raised important questions about the extent of corporate awareness and oversight in supply chain. It highlighted the need for companies to have comprehensive audit processes to ensure that their ethical standards are upheld at every level of product and supply. In conclusion, Apple's initial response to the working conditions in its supplier factory serves as a case study in corporate responsibility and the importance of transparency, and underscores the expectation that companies should be fully aware of and actively manage all aspects of their operation, especially when it comes to ethical labor practices. So Apple's post-scrutiny decisions The intense public and media scrutiny over the working conditions at Apple's supply factories prompted the company to take several corrective actions to address the issues and improve its supply chain management. Apple initiated a series of comprehensive audits to assess the actual working condition in its supplier factories. These audits were aimed at identifying the key areas where the company's standards were not being met and to develop strategies to address these gaps. In an effort to increase transparency, Apple began publishing annual supplier responsibility reports. These reports provide insight into the company's supply chain practices, including labor and human rights, workers' health and safety, and environmental compliance. Apple became a member of a Fair Labor Association, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving workers' lives worldwide. The FLA conducted independent audits of Apple's supplier factors, which added an additional layer of accountability and transparency to Apple's efforts. As a result of these actions, there were notable improvements in working conditions within Apple's supply chain. This included the implementation of reducing worker hours to prevent excessive overtime, enhanced safety measures to protect workers, and overall better compliance with labor standards. In conclusion, Apple's response to scrutiny over working conditions demonstrated the impact of public and media pressure in driving corporate change. It also highlighted the role of independent audits and transparent reporting in upholding companies' accountability for their supply chain practices. So again, I'd like to point out, as soon as people found out about this, they switched from Apple to Samsung. And a lot of people refused to switch back. If your company is doing something unethical, it is only a matter of time before it becomes public. And if your name is on the decision that made you go that way, it's not going to look good for you in the long run. So there is a financial incentive here for you to be ethical ahead of time, not reactively. Child labor and forced labor represent some of the most heinous abuses of human rights in the global workplace. As engineers and companies operate in various regions, it is their moral and legal obligation to ensure that their projects and partnerships do not contribute to or condone such practices. The exploitation of children in the workforce is not only a violation of international law, but is also an act that inflicts long-term social and economic damages on communities. Companies must adopt a zero-tolerance policy towards any form of child or forced labor and conduct regular audits to ensure this stance. When it comes to the treatment of local and expatriate employees, equity must be the guiding principle. This includes equal pay for equal work, comparable benefits, and equal opportunity for advancement. Discrimination in the workplace, whether overt or subtle, undermines the integrity of the company and can lead to long-term reputational damage. In conclusion, addressing the issue of child and forced labor and ensuring equitable treatment for all employees are not just ethical imperatives, but also critical to sustainable business practices. Companies must be vigilant and proactive in their effort to uphold human rights and foster a fair and just work environment. So, one thing I do want to say while I'm on this slide is a lot of places and a lot of people like to get cute about both of these terms, child labor and forced labor. So forced labor, if you haven't put two and two together yet, is slavery. And usually child labor is just a form of forced labor. Getting my son to, clean up his own mess is pretty difficult. Getting them to build an iPhone for me would probably be nearly impossible unless they were scared into doing it. But one thing that people like to do when it comes to forced labor is they will rebrand it. They will say, well, it's not forced labor, and they'll give it some new name, but when you look at it, it's very clearly, if that person doesn't do the job you're asking them to do, you will hurt them in some way. When the price of gas dropped in Venezuela a few years ago, to the point that it was no longer profitable to pump it out of the ground, the Venezuelan government forced all of the engineers who were not from Venezuela to stay there, didn't allow them to leave, didn't pay them, um, and they gave it some cute name like patriotic production or something like that. But the reality was those engineers didn't want to be there. They were being imprisoned. They weren't being paid. Um, and for all intents and purposes, they were slaves. Um, and this happens all the time. So just because it gets rebranded doesn't necessarily mean you're not doing it. Um, and so you do have to pay attention to the work conditions. Are the employees, for all intents and purposes, really slaves? So, because of how heinous some of this stuff is, and the thing is, with all abuse, it always gets worse. Um, right? So Foxconn, instead of making things better, put up suicide nets. Um, I doubt that the in the Nike situation, they found out because somebody just reported them. I'm sure a child had to go to the hospital. Um, if they're willing to use forced or child labor, they're they're not too many steps away from endangering their workforce. At that point, the person is a piece of property, and you don't care that that piece of property is going to get damaged if it makes you a dollar. So there is a big ethical responsibility on our end, whether you are at the top of the corporate ladder or the bottom, to make sure that this isn't happening. And there are plenty of laws saying this is illegal. I doubt that there are any countries today that, say slavery is legal. Um, but there is an expectation as an engineer that if you see something that is just a rebranded version of it, that you do something about it. And there are plenty of organizations that exist to help with something like this. Um, so there is this expectation of due diligence. Due diligence is a cornerstone of ethical business conduct, particularly when it comes to labor practices. Regular audits and review are essential to ensure the local contractors and suppliers uphold the standards expected by the company and the broader community. While it's crucial to respect and understand local customs and norms, these should never be used to justify unethical business practices. Cultural sensitivity must go hand in hand with commitment to uphold fundamental human rights and fair labor standards. That is to say, if a culture tries, or somebody tries to tell you, hey, in my culture, slavery is okay, you have to come back and say, well, we're still not going to follow it. Um, Transparency in labor practices is not just about regulatory compliance, it's about building trust with consumers, partners, and the workforce. Being open and willing to address and rectify labor issues demonstrates a company's integrity and dedication to ethical practices. Engagement with local communities, workers' unions, and non-governmental organizations is vital to understanding the real-world impact of labor practices. This engagement can provide valuable insight into experience. Oh my God, the lived experience of workers and help the community to make informed and compassionate decisions. There are four pillars: due diligence, cultural sensitivity, transparency, and stakeholder engagement. These are integral to maintaining ethical labor practices and global engineering projects. They help ensure that companies expand their operations, they remain committed to the principle of fairness, respect, and accountability.